use routing to efficiently load or replace content in an existing page. We can make the content more dynamic by sending data in the form of parameters to the routing content. In simple, the content which gets loaded through routing may change based on the parameters we send. In order to send parameters via routing, we need to inject and use $routeParameters object. Okay, let's work through a couple of examples. So I have a simple example here. So right now you can see my markup is actually importing Angular and AngularRoute, so which is actually injected right here. So I'm using the ngRoute, and I'm also using route provider here, and currently the route provider is configured for the route and with any other route which has been not configured. So we have two basic things which has been already discussed earlier, and on top of that I have some kind of layout which looks something very similar to an SPA. So if you go back here, you can see this is how it is going to look like the moment I am at the route. Okay, so now that we have some basic things there, I would like to add a couple of links here and demonstrate on how the routing parameters are going to work. Okay, I would like to add a couple of links here. So the first thing, I would like to have something like sum, and I would like to perform the sum using some URL based approach. So all I would like to say is I would like to have sum of values 10 and 20. So which means anytime I click on this particular link, that is some URL, which is going to be shown something like some URL as caption. So right now if I go back here and press refresh, you are going to see that particular link. So this link would actually go to this route. So that is some URL with two parameter values, that is 10 and 20. Right now I hard coded it like 10 and 20. We can change them, and we are going to see that example a bit later. But for now, let us consider from this URL, that is from this route some URL, I would like to extract these two values out of those two and have those values to be actually used as part of our AngularJS functionality, and then calculate something and return the content out as part of our routing. So now that we have 10 and 20 right here, we need to modify our routing so that it actually accepts this route. So I go in here and add a new route. So probably I can add at the very top, and I would like to call this one as some URL. It has to be the same name, so I am going to use copy and paste here. And next, on top of that, I have two values 10 and 20 right here. So I would like to have these two to be automatically captured into two different variables like A and B, or M and N, P and Q, whatever you would like to have there. So I would like to take this 10 into a variable A and this value 20 into variable B. So I go in here and I just say A and B. So this is the convention. So whenever you have the prefix as colon, it says that it is really a variable which should actually extract that particular value out of the URL and assign to itself. So now A is going to have 10 and B is going to have 20 automatically. So once we are there, so that is we are trying to still configure this route. So I am going to have the route options to be provided here. So in this case I would like to go with a different template. So that the template I'm going to call it as some url.html, and I would like to have that template to be actually bound to a particular controller. So I would like to call that one as some URL as well. So let us make sure it is the same thing. Yeah. And now I would like to have the some URL to be actually created. So for that I need to create something like some url.html file. So in this HTML file I am going to have a new div with the values A and B, and at the same time I would like to have B as well. So I just would like to display what are the values of A and B which might have been captured as part of the routing. So this is just the template. We still need to actually place these two values like A and B to the scope variable. So in order to achieve that, we actually need to declare a controller, and that particular controller, as mentioned earlier, it has to be with the same name as the some URL. So I am going to define a new controller, So the name of the controller is going to be some URL, and I need to specify all the necessary parameters. So in this case I would like to inject scope first. Why? Because I would like to use scope. And here is the main thing. In order to extract those particular parameters, whatever you are going to provide as part of your route URL, we will be using routeParams. So this is the service which actually gives us the current route related parameters. So now I can use my function definition, and as part of my function definition I can use those two objects, $scope and $route parameters. Okay. So as part of this one, what can I do? First of all, we should understand, like, this route parameters is an object which contains each of those route related parameters. So in this case we have A and B. So A and B will be automatically made available as members as part of this object by AngularJS framework. So whenever you say $route parameters, you have two members, .a, .b, because those two are our route related parameters. So you can access them directly by just writing routeParams.a. So you can just actually assign to something like variable a or something. So similarly you can also do something like this. So in order to access this A and B, you are using routeParameters.a, routeParameters.b, and those two values we are assigning to A and B respectively. And of course, as I would like to use A and B directly inside our template, I would like to use the scope variable instead. So I am creating two new members called scope.a and scope.b. So A and B are two new scope members which will have the values of those route parameters respectively. And we have the controller, we have the template, and we have the routing setup. And let us see if this is working fine. So I go back here and let's refresh this and click on this one. So there you go. So we have the some URL. You can see our URL which has got 10 and 20, and those have been extracted and automatically displayed here. So if I change this one to something like 30 and say 40, press enter, you can see we are actually having 30 and 40 automatically displayed. So based on the route URL, whatever you are going to specify here, we are able to extract those values out of the URL and use in our scope and in our controller and finally in our own template. So let us make it a bit more functional. So in this case I would like to add something like sum. So I would like to say something like I would like to have sum to be calculated for both of those. So I would like to have A and B. So I just would like to have A plus B. So in this case, as those are treated as strings by default, we might be having a concatenation. So let us see if that is the case. I press F5 and now you can see it has actually concatenated 30 and 40. So I need to convert those variables to parseInt or whatever, but the other easiest way is actually using something like this. So which means we are doing some arithmetic operation and it knows that it has to convert those two values implicitly. So let me refresh this, and now you can see it has automatically calculated 70. So if I delete or modify those values, now you can see it is actually doing the sum based on whatever the URL parameters we are providing here. Okay, so this is pretty much in simple about our routing parameters. So let us go to the next level of example. That is, imagine I would like to provide two different values in two different text boxes. So this might not be really very ideal in every situation. So there are quite a few situations where we would like to provide the values from the user interaction. Like the user provides a couple of values and those values needs to be captured and accepted from the user and then go to the respective route URL and calculate based on those new values. So if such is the case, the important thing is that we need to get the values from the user and go to the route or change the URL with the new values. So how can we achieve that? So let me create a new sample for that one. So which means I'm going to have a new URL. So in this case, instead of calling it as some URL, just for our understanding, I would like to call this one as some input. So I'm not going to specify what this one is. So it is just some input at the moment with no route parameters. So which means I'm not specifying any route parameters at the moment. So instead of this URL, I would like to have this caption like some input. So I'm going to see a new one here that is just some input. Okay, so let me go home here. So this is how it is going to look like. Okay, now I have to define what is some input. So I go back to my JavaScript here. So inside my JavaScript, I need to specify first of all the route. So it will be very similar to this one. So the first thing is that it will be some input. So let me copy and paste. So this is going to be my URL. So that is the routing URL, and as I mentioned, I am not going to use any kind of routing parameters for this case. However, I would like to have a new HTML file to be defined and new controller to be defined. So this is nothing but the template. So I would like to have a new template file to be created, and I would like to call this one as some input as well. And inside this div, I would like to have two different text boxes to be created. So I would like to say A to be actually having the value for member A. So this is the simplest way on how I can actually get the information right from the user in the form of a text box. So once the user types anything in this text box, it will be automatically assigned to the scope member called A using the two-way data binding. And this scope A is automatically made available throughout the current scope and the current controller. So I'm going to have another one to be declared just like A. I would like to call something like B here, and I'm going to take B here as well. And I would like to have a new button to be clicked by the user so that the sum can be calculated once I hit this button. So I'm going to say ngClick of do sum. So I'm going to call this particular function called doSum, which is supposed to actually take back to our sum URL, which is already equipped with those two values in the form of routing URL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two values from these two text boxes and reroute to a new route, that is some URL which can accept those two values. So for that purpose, of course, I need to have a new controller to be defined in my JavaScript. So I would like to have the same name as I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to call it as same input controller. So that is going to be the name, and I need to define my function here. So I don't really need to use the route parameters here. I can just forget this. Okay. So initially, if I would like to have any kind of values to be provided for A and B respectively, I can just provide something like 0 and 0. So what this one does is it will have the default values of A and B to be initialized with zeros, and those zeros will be automatically appearing as part of our text boxes. So now let us consider I am actually pressing F5 here and go to some input. Now you can see A and B are available with two text boxes with the default values 0 and 0. And of course I did not write any code for this one yet, but the goal is whenever I click on sum, I need to pick these two values out and go to this sum URL route automatically by placing those two values and get the new result out. So that is my goal. So in order to accomplish that, first of all, we need to change the URL of the browser, which means currently it is showing some input. It has to go back to our previous thing, something like some URL. So I need to change the browser's related location, that is the URL. For that purpose, I need to inject another service called location. So I'm going to use this one. And in order to have some kind of string interpolation, I would like to use interpolate as well. So, and again, I need to use those two in my function. Okay. So now I need to define the function. So what is the function I am actually supposed to invoke, that is do sum. So I'm going to define at the scope level, that is do sum equal to function. So in this function, I'm going to specify the URL first. So that is, I have to switch to a new URL. So we need to specify the URL. So for that purpose, I am going to calculate the URL here using the string interpolation. So that is, I have the interpolate here. So I'm going to use the same variable. And I need to provide the route. So in this case, my route is some URL. So you can see I would like to go to this some URL. So that's the same route. And on top of that, I would like to have the values of A and B to be automatically made available here. So in that way, I can use my string interpolation to actually replace the existing brace related A's with the value of A itself. And similarly, I can say B as well. Okay, and this interpolate, it has to work with the current scope. So that is what I'm going to use here. So that is the URL. So let us see if the URL itself is correctly calculated or parsed. I mean interpolated. So all I'm doing is just would like to write URL to the console log and see if it is the way to go. So I just press F5 here. Okay, so I'm missing something. So let us check. Add a comma here. So I go home, I press F5, and now I click on some input. I provide something like 44, 55, and click calculate sum. Now you can see how it has retrieved. That is sum URL 4445. So this is the one which needs to be placed right here, and that actually goes to that route and brings the new content based on the new parameters we already have. So the functionality is already existing. All we have to do is that we need to redirect to that route. So in order to achieve that, we will be using the location. So you can use something like location.path to our URL. So this is the URL variable. I'm using the same variable here. So the moment we do this, it actually replaces our particular URL of the browser with this new URL. So let me go back here. Let us go home, press F5, and go to input. Let us provide something like 67, 78, and the moment I click on calculate sum, you can see it has automatically switched to this new URL, placing those new values, and you can also see how it has calculated the sum based on the new values it has retrieved. Similarly, I can still go back to input, provide new values something like 55 and 66, and click on calculate sum, which actually returns the new content based on the new parameters. Okay, so this is pretty much about how we can reroute to an existing route based on some values, whatever we can capture from the user. And let us go to the next level. That is, we can have some kinds of optional parameters. So let us see how we can define optional parameters. So in this case, whenever we define this A and B, we are saying that this A and B are essential. If you miss any of these two, it will be just simply thinking like it has to go to otherwise, because it does not match with the routing whatever we specify here. And if any URL or the route doesn't match, it just simply goes to this otherwise in this case. So let us try without providing second parameter, and press enter. Now you can see it did not do anything. All it did was it just went to our otherwise thing and said no content available here, click something blah blah blah. Okay, so what can I do now in order to have some kind of default value, not the default values, optional values to be specified. So in order to specify the optional values, all we really need to use is a question mark symbol. So let me create another route so that it can demonstrate. So in this case, I would like to create a new route, new link in this case, and I would like to call something like some optionals. And this one I would like to call something like sum 4. So that is like I'm trying to provide 4 values in order to do sum. So I would like to provide all the values here. So that is like all the 4 values. But I would like to make a couple of those particular parameters to be optional. So that is what I'm going to deal with. So for that, I actually go back to my JavaScript and add new route. and the new route is going to be sum4, and I would like to have a new template, new controller to be created. But for the sum4, I would like to have 4 parameters to be specified, and out of those 4 I would like to have 2 to be optional. So for that I would like to say go with A, go with B, C as the third one, and D as the last one. So if you specify like this, you are saying that all 4 are mandatory. But the moment I say question mark here, those particular parameters will be automatically made optional. So which means you may or may not provide those 2 values at all. If you provide 3 values, the third will always be C. It doesn't go to D at all. So if you need to provide D, you need to provide C as well. Okay. So in this case, as mentioned, it has to have the sum4 to be created. So in order to have the sum4, I would like to use whatever I already have in place, that is some URL. So I would like to duplicate this guy and call it as sum4.html, and as part of this I will be having a couple more values like C and D. So I would like to have C and D as well, and I would like to use the same kind of trick in order to actually modify, or say implicitly convert our strings to numeric values. So this is supposed to be D. Okay, so now that we have everything in place, no, not yet, I missed the controller, so I need to have the controller to be defined. So I will be writing the very similar to what we have in place, that is some URL. So I just wanted to copy this, and this is going to be sum4, and just like A and B, I'm going to have C and D as well. So this is going to be C, this is going to be C as well, this is D, and this is D. Okay, so this is how I'm actually having A, B, C, D defined with all the 4 parameters, where the last 2 are going to be optionals. Okay, so I go back here, so let me go home and refresh it, and we are going to see some optionals, and I click on that. And now you can see it has actually calculated the sum of all of those 4 values. But imagine I'm not going to provide one value, that is I removed 30. Now in this case, the first is treated as A, B, and the third is always going to be C. So I press enter, and you can see the D is somewhat nullified because we did not provide that, and 40 is actually treated as a value for C, and still we can see that the sum is working as usual. And you can also remove the last one because we said at least 2 are necessary, and the moment you provided both of those 2, you can see it was still able to calculate based on the optional parameters. Okay, so those are the optional parameters for the routing in general. And there is one important thing which we need to learn about routing parameters, that is redirection. So as part of the redirection, which we already covered a bit in my previous video, I would like to add a new route. So for that route, I would like to add another link, and I would like to call this link as, actually we don't need a link, so let me remove this. Let me go back to JavaScript, and I would like to have a new route to be defined. So this route I would like to call as calculate. So all I'm going to call is calculate. However, this calculate is going to be having an option to be provided in the form of a parameter. So I would like to call something like O and 2 optional values, that is A and B. So I have 3 parameters which will be acceptable in this case. So I have 3 parameters, O, A and B. So let us be a bit more descriptive. So I would like to call this one as option. So the goal is that if I provide the option as sum, then it has to automatically redirect it to something like some URL. If I provide the option as input, then it has to go to this one. So how can we achieve that? So which means you are redirecting from one route to another route based on the routing parameters. So this is not going to do any functional part. All it will be doing is, based on the parameters you send, to this route, it is going to reroute to some other existing route based on the condition you specify here. And for that, we are going to use redirect to. So I can say redirect to function, and this function is going to receive three parameters called params, path, and search. So these three are automatically provided by AngularJS. So before even going for the functional part, let us see what are all those three and how we can make use of those. So I would like to display all of those. So the first one is parameters. So let us see what it is doing in this case. So I save this, I go back here, press refresh. Okay, I go home and just refresh this so that the calc gets loaded. So all I'm going to do is calculate, and in this case the first option I would like to say is sum, and sum with 20 and 30 let us consider. I provided all those values and press enter, and now you can see it has given an object which contains three members, and those three members are nothing but our route parameters. So if you go back here, you can see I have three route parameters: option, A, B. So all those three parameters have been made available in the form of parameters object here. So those three values are immediately available to your parameters. So let us see what is path. And I think I can simply click refresh here, as because it directly goes to the same route. And now you can see it is actually giving the current route path. So that is current route URL, which includes all the parameters and all the route specification. And we have search. So let us see what is search. So just press refresh here. There is nothing at the moment. The object is empty with no members literally. But let us consider if you would like to provide some value, something like p equal to 30, you can actually get your particular object. So let me do something like this. I would like to say something like pq equal to 40, for example. So this is usually called as query string, right? So that particular query string related information can be easily extracted using this object. So this object contains all those query string related parameters, and for some reason instead of calling it as query string, they call it as search. I don't know the reason. We can just follow that. So those are the three specifications. We can actually extract the information directly from the parameters or using the query string, or you can directly extract yourself if you are very good at strings, substrings, or whatever. You can use path as well. But in this case, I am quite flexible with parameters, so I just use parameters for this one. So I am going to say if the parameters dot option, because I am using this particular option, I am just asking if that option, whatever the user is going to provide, is equal to sum, then I'm going to say please go to that particular URL. So that is return to my sum URL. So this is what I'm going to specify. So let me go to this one. So this is the route I'm going to specify, that is sum URL. However, it needs two values because you can see I have A and B. So I need to provide those two values. And those two values are anyway available here through A and B, which can be retrieved using parameters. So I'm going to say params.a-0. So in this case I do not need this, but just to be safe side, in case if the users are not providing the values, if such is the case, I would like to mention that one as 0. And similarly, I would like to have another value which will be treated as B in this case, and I have to get B for that one right from my parameters. So this is going to be B. So this B is extracted and placed here, and this A is extracted and placed here. Finally, this is the route I am going to redirect whenever I have the option to be specified as sum. If not, I can specify another route, that is if it is something like this. So if the user says input, then all I'm going to do is I am going to redirect to this sum input. So I am going to say return to sum input, nothing much. So this sum input doesn't have any route parameters, so I didn't need to worry about sending those two values. So in fact, the user himself doesn't need to send those two values the moment we provide input. And if neither of those options are the ones provided by the user, then I would like to simply redirect to the route. So this is a simple redirection route, whatever I have specified. There is no functional part here. There's nothing which is going to be displayed. No template, no controller. All it does is simply it redirects to some other route based on some condition, and that condition is also based on some kind of route parameter you specify there. So go back here, and now I don't need this, so I just press enter here. Okay, let me click home and let me refresh this. So now I'm going to say calculate sum, and let us say sum 20 and 30. The moment I say that, you can see it has immediately redirected to some URL with those new values. So let us try again with something different. So instead of 20 and 30, I go for sum 2 and 3. Now you can see it has automatically switched to the new route URL by providing the values. So if not, I can just say input. So the moment I say input, you can see it actually switched to some input directly from calculate. So now I can provide 34 and 45, and this will be working as usual. There is no functional difference here. So again, I can just say calculate, and if you provide something which is not available anywhere, then it actually goes back to the route route. So that is how you can actually use redirection and take advantage of the route parameters as well. So we have seen various ways of providing the route parameters, that is directly from the URL, also in the form of optionals, and even in the redirections. And on top of that, we can also access those particular parameters right inside the controller or inside the redirect as well.